It has been a long, long time since I first got the idea to make this video essay. And when I first got that idea, I held off for a medley of reasons. But the foremost of which, best I can remember, is that I was afraid of the backlash I would get. And this is not an idle concern for me. I remember in my first couple years of making these videos, I made one where I had the audacity to say that Reputation by Taylor Swift was not a good album and was a disappointment for her. An opinion I still hold by to this day. And I said this even as I also said that I deeply appreciated and respected Taylor Swift as an artist, and it got me an obscene amount of backlash from angry Taylor Swift fans, the likes of which I still have not experienced all these years later. But I was afraid of a similar backlash if I made a video talking about why I didn't think The Winds of Winter would ever come out. This was back before the show finished wrapping up. It was back before Martin made all those grand promises about actually getting work done when he was locked inside his house during the pandemic like the rest of us were. And nothing came of that. Years and years pass. The show, which we were so excited about, left such a bad taste in our mouths, and still nothing came of The Winds of Winter. I think after all these years, I am no longer afraid of any real backlash by making a statement like this. I think everyone pretty much in the Song of Ice and Fire fandom who is not either very idealistic or very delusional is at least ready to consider the possibility that The Winds of Winter might not come out ever. At least not during Martin's lifetime. But before that, a quick anecdote. I first started reading the Song of Ice and Fire books when I was in 8th grade. This was back in 2014. It's spring of that year. The weather's getting warm here in Colorado. All the trees are blossoming. The landscape's starting to turn green and the last snows are melting away. And I'm in a competition with one of my close friends at the time about who can read through these Ice and Fire books faster. I started a couple weeks behind him, but I grew so devoted to these books that I read them long past the hour when I knew I should have been asleep. So I quickly passed him and went on to book 2, then book 3. I finished the 2nd book by the time I graduated middle school, and my appetite was not satiated. I couldn't stop reading. But when I got to about the end of A Storm of Swords, something changed. Not all at once, but gradually. I found I was no longer as invested in the world and the characters as I had once been. That's not to say I had grown completely apathetic, and to a certain extent I was just a little exhausted of spending so much time in this world all in one block. But still, this uncertainty remained. I found myself not quite as driven to keep reading as I had been in the previous months. But I kept going into the summer. I made it through A Feast for Crows, and I struggled into A Dance with Dragons. But my malaise overwhelmed me. There were so many other things to read, and I just didn't feel as invested in the world as I wanted to be. It felt too meandering. It felt like there were too many plots and subplots that weren't going anywhere. Felt like the characters were hardly doing anything compared to what they had been doing in the first couple books. I'm not exactly someone who calls for constant action. My favorite book of all time is Mrs. Dalloway, which is literally just about a woman preparing to host a party in the most reductionist sense of the term. But I was a bit tired of all these hundreds and hundreds of pages going by and the characters not really progressing and their schemes feeling a bit stale and derivative of plots that had come earlier in the books. So I stopped before the summer ended and before I finished A Dance with Dragons. I told myself that if and when the final book of the series came out, I would go back and finish A Dance with Dragons and finish the whole series. Here we are, 8 years later. Winds has not come out. A Dream of Spring might never come out. And I have still not completely finished A Dance with Dragons. I'm not saying that to be dramatic or to be self-congratulatory or self-pitying. I'm really not. I'm just saying that to add a personal perspective to how long and arduous this wait has been, and how uncertain it is that, number one, the books will ever be finished by Martin or by anyone, and number two, that if they are finished, it will be even remotely satisfying. There is a lot of good stuff in books 4 and 5. I love a lot of the contemplations of war and how messy and unglamorous it can be, and how a lot of our grandiose, idealistic expectations can fade into just grime and suffering and grief. But being subversive and consciously undermining all of these grandiose ideals of wars and strategies does not excuse the book just being a drudgery to finish. It's just sludgy and miresome. Not that everyone should be held to the standard of Tolstoy, but in War and Peace, he does a much better job of conveying a steep cynicism about war and conflict and strategy and ideals and so-called great men without being so needlessly exhausting to read. But honestly, books 4 and 5 just dragged on and on and on. And I doubt that even if we do get more books in the franchise, that they will be more satisfying. But of course, even the idea that we will get more books in the future is a bit overly idealistic at this point. It's pretty clear that Martin has written himself into a corner and does not know how to really weave together all of these plot threads going forward. And that is something that we as readers should be worried about if we still harbor even the slightest hope of The Winds of Winter coming out in Martin's lifetime. I keep saying in his lifetime because I am fairly certain that after his death, whatever material he has left is going to be packaged and turned into Winds of Winter and possibly even A Dream of Spring, or possibly it's going to be divided into even more books. After all, there is a lot of material. I don't doubt Martin when he says that. And the original series was only supposed to be 3 books in the first place before it ballooned to 7. So, I think that whatever Martin has written is going to be so lucrative an opportunity. And considering all that, I believe a book called The Winds of Winter is eventually going to be published at some time, at some place, even if it's not what Martin intended. But honestly, the whole series has slipped pretty far outside his expectations. I, like a lot of people, was dissatisfied with the ending of the show. It was rushed, it was incoherent, and it was both confusing and blunt at the same time. But it at least was an ending. I really don't want to give the showrunners Benioff and Weiss credit for much of anything in those last couple seasons, but they did at least manage to land the ship. Meanwhile, A Dance with Dragons came out back in 2011, right after the first season of the show had ended. I was in elementary school then. I'm about to graduate college now. Still no book. And there is a possibility that even if Martin's manuscripts are published and finished as the last few books in the series, that we might not get even as decisive an ending as the show gave us and that Martin intended. This is unfortunate, and I wish that Martin had been able to finish the books in a satisfying fashion. After all, he did give us at least a few really great fantasy books that are challenging and evocative and daring, and so steeped in all the complexities and wonders of history and all its sorrows and laments, too. The first 3 books are genuinely great, and the second 2 at least have a few good scenes. But I really don't think there is any reason to believe that Martin is going to finish these books, or even finish The Winds of Winter, and I think we should start to reconcile ourselves to that. Tolkien was not exactly publishing a lot of things in his 70s, and Robert Jordan of the Wheel of Time series was dead by then. Martin is 73. I don't know how much longer he will live, but I think it's reasonable to think at this point that we're not going to receive the grand, beautiful, elegantly constructed finale to the series that a lot of us really intended. I hope that, if not Martin, then whoever does finish the books after his death is able to give us something that's at least more satisfying than we got for the show, and is at least able to work in those themes in a little more elegant of a fashion. But it is possible that we could get books that are just so diffuse and so meandering, encompassing everything people didn't like about the last 2 books while incorporating very few of the strengths those books had. I'm saying we should be prepared to be disappointed. That's not something I'd like to say, but it is, I think, a reality that we all should try and reconcile ourselves to at this point. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. I'm sorry this video was such a downer, but I really feel that all of this has to be said. And I still think there's hope for House of the Dragon to be excellent. Although it is a little perverse that Martin was able to publish this side project that's a history of House Targaryen, but not the actual main Winds of Winter. But alas, c'est la vie. Life happens like that. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Promise you that. Thank you all again. Adios, comrades.